Hi everyone, welcome back. Today we are starting with Docker. Docker is one of the most important tools in modern DevOps because it helps developers run applications consistently across different environments. In this video, we will install Docker Desktop, understand the core Docker concepts, run our first container, and launch a real web server using Nginx. Before using Docker, there are three important concepts we need to understand: containers, images, and Docker files. Containers are isolated environments where applications run. Images are templates used to create containers. And Docker files define the steps Docker uses to build images. So why do developers use Docker? Docker provides portability, consistency, isolation, and scalability. Containers can run anywhere, the environment stays consistent, applications run independently, and services can scale quickly. At a high level, Docker works in three simple steps. First, we build an image. Then, Docker creates a container from that image. Finally, the application starts running inside the container. Before we move into the hands-on section, here are a few essential Docker commands you will use very often. Docker build creates an image. Docker run starts a container. Docker ps lists running containers, and Docker stop stops a running container. Now let's use Docker for real and run our first container. Now it's time to run our first container. We will install Docker Desktop, verify the installation, and launch the Hello World container. Then we'll continue with a real web server using Nginx. Now let's begin with the installation process. And as always, make sure you download software from the official websites. First, we go to docker.com and download Docker Desktop for macOS. Once the installer finishes downloading, we can open the package and begin the installation. And for our projects in this series, we will also use Visual Studio Code, so we'll download that tool as well. Visual Studio Code will help us write code, manage files, and run Docker commands directly from the integrated terminal. On macOS, Docker Desktop is installed by simply dragging the Docker icon into the Applications folder. After that, we can use Spotlight Search to find Docker and launch it for the first time. Docker Desktop will begin the setup process automatically and may request some permissions during startup, which is completely normal. When Docker Desktop starts for the first time, we may see the Docker Subscription Service Agreement screen. This is simply the license agreement for using Docker Desktop. For personal learning, education, and small projects, Docker can be used for free. So we can review the agreement and continue with the installation. Docker Desktop is now fully installed and running. At this point, Docker may ask us to verify our email account, which is part of the normal Docker Desktop setup process. After logging in, we can access the Docker Desktop interface. Here we can manage containers, images, volumes, and other Docker resources visually. Right now, we don't have any running containers yet because we haven't executed any Docker commands. Now let's verify that Docker was installed correctly. Inside Visual Studio Code, we can open the integrated terminal and run our first Docker command, docker -- version. If Docker is installed correctly, we should see the Docker version information displayed in the terminal. This confirms that Docker Desktop is running and ready to use. Now let's run our first container. Docker run Hello World. Docker will first check if the Hello World image already exists locally. If the image is not available, Docker automatically downloads it from Docker Hub and creates a container from it. The container runs a very small application that prints a success message to the terminal. This confirms that Docker is working correctly on our machine. Now let's inspect the containers created by Docker. Docker ps-a. This command shows all containers, including stopped containers. Here we can see the container created from the Hello World image. The status shows exited because the Hello World application only runs for a few seconds and then stops automatically. Docker still keeps the container information locally unless we remove it manually. Now let's install and run Nginx using Docker. Nginx is a very popular web server commonly used in modern applications and cloud environments. We can start it with the following command. Docker will automatically download the Nginx image from Docker Hub and start the container for us. The container runs in the background, and port 8080 on our machine is connected to port 80 inside the container. Now, if we run Docker ps, we can see the running container, the exposed ports, and the current status. And finally, if we open the browser and go to localhost and port 8080, we can see the default Nginx web page running successfully inside a Docker container. And just like that, we deployed our first web server using Docker. Today we installed Docker Desktop, ran our first containers, explored essential Docker commands, and launched a real Nginx web server locally. At this point, Docker is fully working on our machine, and we already understand the basic workflow of running containers. This is the foundation of modern DevOps and cloud-native environments. In the next video, we'll learn how to build our own Docker images using Dockerfiles and continue moving deeper into containers and Kubernetes. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.